Hi, welcome back to Ridgehaven Homestead. I'm in the kitchen and today I'm making beans. The problem of beans sometimes with many people is the gas, and that's just how it is. So there are a few things that you can do to make that a little bit easier on your system, especially if you're not used to eating beans. It's such a simple thing to do, but sometimes it's the simple things that kind of elude us. So I was making beans anyway, and somebody asked me to share how we make them here. So I want to do that. Okay, there's 3 ways that I make beans, mostly only 2. Crockpot, pressure cooker, or sometimes on the stove. Rarely it's on the stove just because I usually don't want to stand around and babysit it. But what I was planning to do for this video was to make the beans on the stove because we've had such cloudy weather. I was worried about running the crock pot all day and taking that electricity since our batteries have been, eking out their existence because we've had like 3 or so days of clouds. Now that the sun has come out and it looks like it's going to charge our batteries, I am going to go ahead and do this in the crock pot. So, without further ado, let's go start. Before I start on the actual bean preparation, I want to talk to you about a couple of principles of making beans. Now, the problem of beans sometimes with many people is the gas, and that's just how it is. So there are a few things that you can do to make that a little bit easier on your system, especially if you're not used to eating beans. First thing is a long cook time. I like to use the crock pot when I cook beans because I think they taste the best. They have a long cook time. I usually do them overnight, and it really makes them tender, and it really gets the seasonings cooked into the beans. And so that actually also helps break down the phytic acid that's in the beans, which causes the gas. However, there's another trick that you can do, 2 more tricks that I know of that can help cut down that gassiness drastically. One is soaking them, and if you soak them for like 4+ hours, that plumps them up, and somehow that helps them to absorb the water. It somehow helps them to cook fully, versus taking a raw bean and just cooking it, forcing it to cook. It doesn't plump up as nicely and it doesn't get as tender. Therefore, it's not fully as cooked as if it had been soaked. But reality is, I don't always soak my beans. When I do them in the crock pot, I generally don't, because I think the slow cooking time and the slow time it takes for the crock pot to build up the heat, that seems to plump them up in the process, but it's best to soak them. Soaking can occur in 2 ways. You can just throw them into a bowl or a pot, fill the pot with water, rinse them off, and let them sit for 4+ hours. It's easiest overnight. Or you can do the fast soak, which is listed on the back of your beans. Everybody can see that. You put them in your pot, you bring it up to boil. You boil for, I believe, 1 minute, and then you turn off the heat and you leave it in the hot water and you soak it for at least an hour. And then after that time, you have soaked your beans in the fast method, and then you can cook them. You drain the water off. And the soaking water, contains a lot of that substance that causes you to get gas. So they say throw it off. One additional thing that you can do that is a help to cutting the gas in your system is, after you've soaked the beans, take the beans, rinse them, drain them, and then throw them in the freezer at least overnight. Somehow that again further breaks down the enzyme that causes gas. So I have done that today. I have soaked them overnight, and then actually for a couple days I had them in the freezer because in anticipation for doing this video I decided to do that. And so that will actually make cooking the beans way faster, and it will just speed up the process. What am I going to do today? I'm going to cook them in the crock pot. I'm going to tell you, I got a little crock pot recently from Walmart. There's a box for it. This is a 2-quart crock pot. And I thought I would get this crock pot for making our beans during the week for when it's just 3 or 4 of us, basically just 3. I don't always want to do a big crock pot. I wasn't really anticipating how small of a crock pot that was going to be. It's about this big, as this is also a 2-quart pan. It works. It actually works very well for cooking beans, but you're just not going to get that many. And if you like them soupy, you might need to be a little bit bigger. So I decided that a 3 or 4-quart crock pot is probably the more ideal size. If you want it soupy, if you just want straight beans, you can probably do it in that pot for one meal. But the little crock pot that I got, I discovered it's a perfect size for making 9-grain cereal for breakfast, because we don't need so much of that, and it can cook overnight. And let me show you how big it is. This is how big the crock pot is, and I have some 9-grain cereal in here that I have refrigerated, the leftovers. And so we really don't want a lot more than this, 2 quarts of hot cereal. And just as a side note, cooking or cracked grain cereal requires a long cook time, a long and slow, so that you can actually benefit from it. And so cooking it overnight is one way to do that. But this baby crock pot isn't quite going to cut it for beans, unless it's just for like one small meal. This happens to be a 6-quart crock pot, and I am going to cook the beans in it today because I want the extra juiciness. My husband likes the beans soupy, and so I'm going to use this and get started. This method of cooking beans is super simple. I'm just going to use this crock pot, and I mentioned that I have already soaked and frozen and partially thawed the beans. So I have a pound of beans here, and they're still a little bit frozen, but they're going into the crock pot. And they smell very beany. Yes, indeed, very beany. Okay, next we need some water. It is best, when in doubt, to add more water. You don't want your beans to go dry. My staple ingredients include garlic powder, onion powder, which I just found that I ran out of. But because I don't have onion powder, I am going to chop an onion. Cumin, sometimes, I don't always add cumin. And I have a little bit of paprika. This is the Hungarian paprika that I like to use. I have a little bit left, and I could round it out with smoked paprika, but I found that, you know, it's a very personal preference whether you like smoked or not. So I'm probably just going to stick to the regular paprika, the Hungarian. And then one more ingredient that really helps, I think, with beans, and that is nutritional yeast flakes. I just got them in a pint jar here. I get these in bulk, or sometimes I've gotten them from Yoder's. It's just adds a rich flavor that we really like in the beans. So it's okay when you're mixing the beans and your ingredients, it's okay to go ahead and turn your crock pot on. Now this crock pot is a different kind than I used to have. I haven't had this one too long. Most crock pots that I've used, you just plug it in and there's a knob. And this one's a slightly more fancy, and I like to cook them on high until they're really going, and then I will turn them to low, depending on how much time that I'm going to use. Oftentimes I cook my beans overnight, so 8 hours at least, 6-8 hours, and that really helps to get them fully cooked. So I'm heating this up already, and then my crock pot has an option where it's going to go for 4 hours, and I'm just going to increase that to 8.5 hours, and I'm going to be checking. It's not like I'm leaving the house, but if I did leave the house, it would shut off at 8.5 hours. So the first thing I'm going to do is chop my onions and then start adding my seasonings. onion, even though you may not love the taste of onion, it gives such a good flavor to soups that I hate to leave it out. Now, I don't like the taste of raw onions all that well, but when you cook them in soup, it really helps. And I find that my husband, who really doesn't like the taste of onions either, he doesn't mind it if they're cooked in, as long as they're cooked very well. So go ahead and chop your onions pretty small. I'm gonna get that peely part off. And this is a strong onion because it's already making me cry. My goodness. It's making my eyes tear right up. Whew. Oh my goodness. Yes, wow. Woo. That was strong, really strong. Okay, so I would probably normally add about a tablespoon of paprika. It looks like I have about a teaspoon here, so it's all going in. And we'll clean out the canister. And that goes on my list. I got that Hungarian paprika at the Yoder store, and I really like it. Okay, garlic powder. You can use fresh garlic, garlic paste, whatever you like. Be generous on your garlic if you like garlic. If you don't, then just go sparing on it, obviously. I like to add at least a teaspoon or two, and this is about 2 teaspoons of garlic powder. And that's going to be stronger than maybe some people would like it. That's okay. Cumin. My husband really likes cumin. I don't always add cumin. It adds a strong flavor, so I'm going to add a teaspoon of cumin. And this is a tablespoon, so I'm adding, a third of a tablespoon is a teaspoon. That is why you learn fractions, so you can easily do recipes and you don't have to grab another measuring thing. Okay, for the yeast flakes, I like to add a lot. And so these I smashed down yesterday so I could fit them in the jar. So I'm adding basically 2 heaping tablespoons, and since they're so powdered down, that probably equals double that, and I'm adding 1 more. So that's about 5 tablespoons of nutritional yeast flakes. Brewer's yeast is not the same as nutritional yeast flakes. It will taste a lot stronger, so I wouldn't recommend that. Okay, cumin, onion powder, garlic powder, yeast flakes. Sometimes I will add dill, or sometimes I will add Italian seasoning if I feel like it. And I'm going to add just a little bit of, I have some powdered oregano, and I like that flavor. You don't need a lot. It adds just a little bit of a kick to it. And so I'm adding about 1/2 teaspoon of dried oregano. Just gives you a little bit more of that chili flavor. Now, if you want to add chili powder, you can. I don't even know if I have chili powder. Sometimes I will add cayenne pepper, but I usually add this at the end because from one of our friends who does a lot of research on herbs, he found through the different studies that he's looked at that cayenne pepper and the different hot peppers, they can irritate the lining of your stomach if you cook them, but usually when you eat them raw, they don't have that same effect. So sprinkle the cayenne on your beans if you like them hot, but generally do it after they're cooked. And then that gives people options of whether they want to add a little bit of heat or not. Okay, as you can see, I'm stirring with my knife. And that is all there is to it. Of course you want to add salt because unsalted beans are disgusting, but you don't want to add the salt until you are completely done cooking them. So if I can find my lid, here we go. I'm gonna cook them. And this is a handy dandy crock pot. It comes with a little thing that snaps it down for traveling, but I don't cook it with the snaps down. But if I happened to, they actually have a little burp valve so the steam can escape. So that's in case you forget and in case your kids come along, because this has happened where they lock it down and then it's basically a pressure cooker and you don't really want that. So that's a release valve on that. Okay, so leave this in here, keep an eye on it, give it a stir every now and then. And many times I like to add a tomato component to the beans. Here I have a pint of home canned tomato puree with basil. And so I will be adding this, but I also learned that when you add your tomatoes, it's best to add them once the beans are fully cooked, because somehow, I don't know if it's the acid in the tomatoes, but something in the tomatoes also can prevent the beans from fully cooking. Same if you add the salt. So add your tomatoes, add your salt when you're done. And that, my friends, is the easy way to cook beans. Now I'm going to go through the second easy way. For a faster way to cook your beans and have the same flavor, get a pressure cooker. This is not a pressure canner. I suppose you can if you have a small rack and you get the jars up off the bottom. And it comes with a rocker that you add on top, and then you have a fast way to cook your beans. So the same beans, the same amount, the same proportions, you will cook in your pressure cooker, and they will cook in about 45 minutes. Now, if you notice on your pressure cooker, you can find it, there's two lines. There's a line here, and there's a line here. Okay, I learned something all this time. The half fill mark and the 2/3 fill mark are two handy lines that are marked on your pressure cooker when you buy it. When you're cooking beans, you're never supposed to go above the half full mark. That includes with your beans and your liquid combined. Because when beans cook, they expand, they froth and foam. And so that, my friends, is when I try to cook split peas in the pressure cooker, I get all this foam shooting out because I was under the impression that 2/3 was the max fill. Well, the 2/3 mark is the max fill if you're doing anything but beans, like if you want to do potatoes or anything like that. But beans and rice and anything that might sputter and do that stuff, don't fill above 1/2. So take your ingredients, put them in your pressure cooker, and cook it on the stovetop. It will cook a lot faster. I just wanted to show you that cooking beans can be really simple. It doesn't take a lot of your time. If you don't have a crock pot, that's okay. There's plenty of other things you can do. You can just use a regular pot on the stove. You want to keep it covered and allow for just a little bit of steam to escape. And keep it on, once you get it boiling, keep it on a low heat and it'll cook for a long time. One of my readers or my subscribers was also telling me recently how she uses a Dutch oven on top of her wood stove in the winter to cook her beans. And I thought, what a great way to save energy and cook at the same time. So I am going to be trying that. We have some Lodge Dutch ovens that we use out in the campfire. And this one is a Pioneer Woman Dutch oven. It is cast iron, but it's enameled. And so if I had not been using my crock pot today, I was planning to make my beans on the stovetop in this Dutch oven over a very low heat. And it works perfectly well. You just have to keep an eye on it to make sure it doesn't either boil over or boil dry. But cooking beans is very easy, it's rewarding, and it's delicious. I initially set my crock pot for 8.5 hours and then just let it do its thing. It has been about 4 hours since we started this bean process. And so let's back up here a little bit and see what they're looking like. They're getting nice and soupy, but the beans themselves are still a little bit hard, I think. They're tender, but they're not soft yet. Does that make any sense? Ouch. They've still got a little ways to go before they're going to be done. And we've got a couple hours till the guys will come home, and so hopefully that'll be enough time to get them done because nobody really likes crunchy beans. It's been 6 hours cooking the beans, in the crock pot. And for a minute I thought they were maybe not going to be able to get done in time, but they're getting soft. And so I am going to add the tomatoes. And we want to check these before we add any tomatoes or salt, just to make sure that we're at a good point with them. But they're very tender, and they've made a nice broth around them. So I have two different schools of opinion here in our home. Some absolutely do not like tomato sauce in the beans, and some do. I am probably more in the no tomato sauce camp, but I think there are more people like it, so I'm going to go ahead and add it. So this is a tomato puree that I canned, and it has a couple basil leaves in it. I believe it was from last year. Sometimes I add diced tomatoes, sometimes I add the puree, sometimes it's tomato sauce. And I'm not adding a lot, just a little bit to enhance it. And my husband likes it really brothy, so that's what I'm trying to go for. This is also a good point to add some salt. And looks like my salt thing is about empty. I would add a good tablespoon. That's probably about a half that I'm adding. But before we add any more, we should taste it to see if it's too salty or not. So you can always add a little more. And then this is going to keep on cooking. I don't just add it and say that we're done. I like to add it when there's some more cooking time so that it can cook in to the beans. It's pretty good. I think it needs a little bit more salt. And so I'm going to add a little bit more. This is some sea salt that I got. Let me just add a little bit of this. It doesn't need a lot of salt. And I like to also have the option of people adding it on their own on the table. So yeah, this makes up probably not even quite the tablespoon that I normally would add to this much beans. So this is probably about 2 teaspoons of salt. Okay. Now it's all over but the waiting for people to come home, and at this point, since the beans are cooked, I'm turning this down to low. It's on low power, and let me give it 2 hours, and that'll be good. Hopefully by then my crew will be back, but even if this had another 30 minutes, that would be plenty. And after probably another hour, I'll turn it to keep warm because I don't want the beans to disintegrate. We just want to keep it at a good temperature until my crew comes home. The verdict is in. We got 2 thumbs up from every person, and my husband ate 3 or 4 bowls, so I think it was a pretty good success. And the biggest success was I didn't hear any music in the night, so we all slept a lot better without the side effects of beans. Have a great day.